Welcome again to another edition of the Combat Press Midweek Report. We are here yet again, here to talk about lots of fights that happened over the weekend. I am your host, Riley Contek. With me, as always, your third or fourth appearance, Matt Quiggins, down from Florida. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good, pretty good. It's a little cold, but nothing us Floridians can't handle.
Yeah, I'm sure it's really cold there since I even have sub-zero temperatures starting tomorrow, you selfish a-hole. Anyways, just some quick plugs before we get started. We got a lot to talk about tonight. Just make sure that you check out combatpress.com for your latest in interviews, opinion pieces, and previews, and all the good stuff. We've been breaking news lately. So again, that's a website you need to watch out for. Make sure you also follow them on Twitter at Combat Press. You can follow myself on Twitter as well. I will say it at the end of the show again, but it is at Big Riles MMA. And for my associate, Mr. Quiggins, his is Quiggins MMA. Very simple. Follow us on Twitter again. And also one more shameless plug. Also follow my work on BleacherReport.com for previews, prospect analysis, and everything in between. Now, tonight we have a lot to talk about. It was a very busy weekend. The top three MMA promotions in the world, arguably, were on. We had a UFC card on Saturday. We had a Bellator card on Friday. And we had a World Series of Fighting card on Thursday, as well as a bunch of other regional MMA that we're not going to touch on because we have a lot to talk about. But we'll start out with probably the most important was the UFC card. We had the UFC Fight Night 60 from Colorado. Shout out to Rob Tatum. That's where he lays his head at night in Colorado. We had a main event, a welterweight bout between Brandon Thatch and ex-UFC lightweight champion Benson Henderson, who moved up in weight to take this fight on short notice. It was a 4-round affair. It was fairly competitive, although early on it looked like Thatch was going to handle things. But Henderson, being the ex-champion that he is, came back and ended up winning by rear naked choke in the 4th round over Thatch, who, in losing, probably boosted his stock anyways and looks to be one of the future stars of the welterweight division. So, Quiggins, how would you break down that fight, and how would you rank each man's performance?
I mean, honestly, Henderson, that first round was a toss-up for him. You could see he was really trying to get into it. The one thing I did notice about him that I haven't really seen in a lot of his fights was his explosiveness. I mean, he was jumping in, throwing that body shot, quicker than I've ever seen him move at 155. I'm wondering where that explosiveness is and if that had anything to do with that extra weight he was cutting. That being said, Thatch looked like he was going to take care of him in the second. And then Henderson, worked really hard for that takedown in the third, got it, took Thatch's back and really let him know that on the ground he was a superior fighter, at least in my opinion. And it showed in the fourth where he finally set up that combination. That level change to the double leg was just textbook. So, in getting that, like you said, both fighters, Thatch has nothing to be ashamed of. He fought a good fight, but for a fighter who never had to go out of the first round really, and at least in a long time, now he has something to work on, especially his ground game.
Yeah, in winning, obviously Henderson, raises his stock. It ends a winless streak for him that had really, hindered him. But obviously he had a good performance despite being completely outsized by. I knew that Thatch was going to be bigger, but I didn't realize how much bigger he was going to be.
Yeah.
And a guy that was, probably outstriking him at that point. So, obviously his stock gets boosted in the win, and obviously I think Thatch really boosted his stock. He took on an ex-UFC champion and took him into the championship rounds and was probably winning up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of just continues to prove why he's one of the best prospects in the 170-pound division, if not the UFC right now. But you were mentioning that Henderson looked quicker and a little more explosive at 170 pounds. Do you think this is where he should stay from now on?
I think another fight at 170 is going to determine that. Because, to be honest, he took this fight on short notice, was able to make the weight. I think he came in, less than half a pound under the 170 limit, if I'm not mistaken. It didn't look like it had any effect on him as far as his speed, his cardio, anything else. So, really, I'd like to see another fight. Against who? That was really a toss-up. There's people online even talking about him fighting Carlos Condit. I think that'd be a not-so-good fight, at least not for Bendo, making his second fight at welterweight. But, it'd be exciting. And if he goes back to 155, let's, rebook that Alvarez fight. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I actually would like to see him at 170 pounds again. I think you're going to start seeing a trend in MMA. I think that the weight cutting thing may have jumped the shark a tad, and I think
Yeah.
Henderson's performance kind of proved that cutting that much weight is not always that beneficial. You're not
No.
always going to get the same energy, the same performance that you would get out if your body was not cutting or shedding as much weight. So I would like to see him fight at 170 pounds again. I had a few names in mind that I wanted him to see fight. I wanted him to fight Rick Story, but now that they're both MMA lab guys, that wouldn't be a fight that would work. But potentially throwing out a guy like Dong Hyun Kim, who does not have a fight scheduled right now, guys with very similar styles. I think that would be a very interesting fight. Although again, I think Dong would be much larger, no pun intended, than Bendo in that fight. But I think overall that was a good main event to a card that really didn't have a whole lot of excitement to it, at least on the main card portion. Moving forward, unless you have anything else to add on that fight, I think we touched everything there.
No, and I mean, I guess the only thing you'd want to touch on is who's next for Thatch at that point.
Oh yeah, and that's a good point. I had thrown out a guy like Jordan Meehan. They have similar styles. They're both young. They're both strikers, and I think that's the fight that really needs to be made.
So that's who I said too. I think that'd be a great fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that booking just makes itself, and they're both top 25 guys in my opinion. Moving on to the co-main event, we had why am I drawing a blank right now?
Featherweight fight.
A featherweight fight, thank you very much, between Max Holloway and Cole Miller. Was the fight of the night, as voted on by the UFC in their $50,000 post-night or fight night bonuses. Holloway walks away with a 3-round unanimous decision. I believe it was 30-27s across the board. Showed improved takedown defense and his signature technical striking. So and he even got pretty much an instantaneous booking after the fight. So Quiggins, what are your thoughts on a whole? Not only Holloway winning, but instantaneously getting booked up with Cub Swanson at UFC on Fox 15 in New Jersey.
Knowing that he took a 30-27 and 2 29-28 from the judges, from what I saw. From what I've read, Dana White said basically whoever wins this is if you want the fight, Cub Swanson. So I think it just makes sense for Holloway. I mean, it's going to be a tough fight, and that really propels him to the next level to take on such a veteran and such a tough guy in Cub. It's going to really prove to see if he belongs in that top 10 featherweights with all those other guys. Maybe a top 15 at that point. Depending on where you rank him. But it should be a good fight.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good matchup stylistically. Both guys like to bang. They're both technical. They're both powerful. So I think that's a very good matchup. I think Cub's a little bit ranked higher, and this might be a bit of a step down for him, but it's a great opportunity for Holloway. And honestly, it's not if Cub gets the win, it's not a bad name to have on your resume at this point, especially a young guy like Holloway, who is the future of the featherweight division, in my opinion, one of the futures. Now there's the question of the couple of headbutts that opened up a cut on Cole Miller's head, and if they should have continued after that. What are your thoughts on the headbutts that occurred? I believe there were 2 of them.
I didn't get to see all of it, so I'm going to leave that on you. I caught the highlights, so not much from it, and they don't really focus on the headbutts.
Yeah, I don't think it would have changed much in the fight. I think Max was in a rhythm and that he was going to fight the way he fought that whole fight. But I think it definitely did affect Cole. I think obviously it rocked him a little bit, and it opened up a cut in a bad place, which could have affected his vision. So I don't want to say it would have affected the outcome, but it definitely affected Cole Miller in a negative way. Now, Cole Miller's a tough guy, and he's a veteran. He's not going to let that stop a fight. But sometimes you got to look at that and be like, maybe we should stop the fight, and that's not on Cole Miller, that's on the referee, and that's on his corner. So if he thought he was good to go, that's the case. But he's a tough guy, and he'll come back. He's one of the true veterans of the UFC. He's been around forever. I believe I think it was his 17th fight in the UFC. So he's been around a little bit. So moving past the Holloway versus Miller fight, we had a welterweight clash between rising Japanese fighter Kiichi Kunimoto. He took on the guy with the longest active winning streak in the welterweight division in Neil Magny. Quiggins, Magny comes out with a submission victory over a Japanese fighter who looked to be a pretty solid mid-carder, looking to make his way up the ladder. So what does this win say about Magny, and where does that put him in the division?
That win, watching that fight, he just poured it on, and he wanted that finish. He had those first 2 rounds, at least in my opinion, and was could have just cruised to a decision. He was really looking for that finish and really looking to make a statement. You have to put him in that, I'm not going to say title contender, but you have to put him in those top 10 guys that he needs to face, because I think he could step it up against a guy like that and really prove himself. A guy who's not just willing to cruise to a judge's decision and wants to end a fight is what fans want to see. It's what Dana White wants to see. It's what everyone wants to see, really. So, that really just his resume, like we talked about, not the star-studded, but I think his next fight, give him a top 10 guy and see what happens.
I'm with you there. I thought he performed very well. Kunamoto is not a joke, and Magny, looked really, really well, and he finished him late, which shows he was, he's always looking for the finish despite being ahead on the scorecard seemingly. But you're right, most of his fights I don't think any of them have been against top 50 guys. So I think this is the point where you really need to throw him in the deep end and say, listen, this is your time. You can't just keep beating the guys at the bottom of the card. You got to move on up. So I mean, I don't know if it's too big of a leap, but again, I mentioned Rick Story. I thought Rick Story was a guy that is in the top 15 right now, and Magny is approaching that top 20 with this winning streak. I think that'd be a nice matchup just to test Neal. I think at this point, Rick's kind of just a gatekeeper, and unless he starts putting together better wins, he's going to stay in there. So his job right now is to test Magny. Is Magny a guy that should jump into the top 15, or is Magny a guy that's going to have to go back to the drawing board and learn something else? I think what Magny really has going for him is that giant reach of his as a welterweight. It's a John Jones-esque reach in terms of welterweights. I don't think there's any guy that's going to get even close to matching up reaches with him, and that's a huge weapon, especially if he learns how to use that distance correctly. So. Obviously Magny is a good talent, and hopefully, and like we said, the guy who wins the Ultimate Fighter is not always the best fighter. I think that he was the best fighter from season 16, and it's finally showing. Colton Smith won the series, and easily not the best fighter from that series. It was definitely Neil Magny.
That was terrible. Let's not even go there.
Yeah, it was a bad season. I agree. Moving forward, we had a catch weight of 191.5 pounds between Australian judo Olympic veteran Dan Kelly and Ultimate Fighter 19, another poor season, Patrick Walsh, excuse me. That fight went to a 3-round decision. It was pretty obvious who won that one, and Dan Kelly, he got the better of the striking exchanges, but it was just a very plodding, awful fight. A lot of people on Twitter saying it was possibly one of the worst fights in UFC history. Hard to argue with that. There's probably a lot worse ones, but in recent memory, that's one that definitely stands out as a very bad fight. Quiggins, I don't know if you caught this fight, but did you stay awake if you did watch it?
No, that was not one I watched. I mean, I caught the beginning of it, and it was that plodding, grudging, just not something. There's grinding and jiu-jitsu and groundwork, and then there's just trudging through a fight, and I couldn't make it through it, to be completely honest. No offense to either one of those guys, but
I did watch it, and I was very, very I was sitting there just astounded at how awful the fight was. I'm all for a stand and bang kind of fight, but not that kind of stand and bang fight. That was very, very plodding, very awful. If either one, almost wished it was a 30-30 draw, just because neither guy. I mean, obviously Kelly got the better of the striking exchanges, but it wasn't like he was setting the world ablaze with his striking as well. So, last week I questioned why this fight was on the main card, and it basically answered it for me in delivery. So. Obviously, Kelly gets his second win in the UFC. He's 2-0 in the company now, and Walsh got to think about going back to light heavyweight after missing weight by 6.5 pounds or 5.5 pounds if you give him the allowance. So
that was pretty bad.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not even going to bother spending any more time on that fight. It's really not worth talking about. But we'll move on to the next fight. It was a lightweight affair between Kevin Lee and Michel Praceres. After 3 rounds, Lee gets a unanimous decision. Again, Quiggins, another fight I was not exactly enthralled with and really don't want to spend a lot of time on, but Kevin Lee, in your opinion, how is he as a prospect in the UFC?
Well, that was another one I didn't catch, to be completely honest. So, this was kind of an up-and-down card because, not so much focusing on just the star power, but, I know that when we did our picks last week, I took Lee for the win, so it was nice to see that. But other than that, not a lot of focus on that just yet. I'd like to see some more wins for Lee. More exciting fights, to be honest.
Yeah, Lee's got a couple of wins in the UFC so far, and he's been competitive in every fight. But he's a guy who hasn't set the world ablaze with his style and hasn't earned a lot of fans in the process. A lot of grinding. His striking has a lot of improvements that need to be made. Obviously, very athletic and explosive and a good wrestler, but and he's still young, and I'll give him that. He's got a lot of time to improve, so I do think he's a good prospect. But as of right now, it's going to be a slow climb up the ladder at this point. Getting a win over Praceres, obviously a big accomplishment. Praceres is not he's not a chump. He's a pretty good fighter. It was just the fight in general. It was just another one of those fights where I was just like, I don't even want to watch this anymore. It was very hard to keep my attention.
And I
Anything
think
else
that comes with the oversaturation, but that's beating a dead horse. So, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, you can make that argument all you want. Honestly, I don't think there's oversaturation. I'll watch MMA every day if they put it on. But you're right. You're going to get some matchups that aren't exactly thrillers.
Yeah.
But other than that, the last main card bout that we had was a flyweight bout between rising prospect Ray Borg, who I believe is only 21 years old, taking on Canada's Chris Kalitis. It was a 3-round affair. It was mostly grappling. It was a pretty interesting grappling match. I don't know if you caught it, but at the end, Borg was able to pull out a Kimura to tap out Kalitis, which was absolutely beautiful, and a lot to do with power in combination with technique. I was surprised he actually got the Kimura the way he did, but it was good. But Borg, ever since losing that controversial decision on short notice in his beginning, hasn't not lost in the UFC. What can we expect out of Ray Borg in the next year?
Rack up a couple more wins, like you said. That Kimura, I mean, it was either half guard, side control, somewhere where you don't usually see someone pull that off. And I mean, from the angle that it was originally shown, you couldn't even see the torque that he was putting on the arm.
Yep.
So, like you said, that was pure just strength.
Yeah, he really bullied that hold in there, because I think in most cases, I don't think guys would have got that. But A, I think Kalitis was tired, and B, I think Borg just honestly used like mule strength and just started cranking that thing. He didn't really have a great position to get it from, but I think he literally just muscled it as far back as he could.
I agree.
Yeah, so I mean that's obviously a huge win for Borg, and there's not a lot of bodies in the flyweight division, so he's really moving up quickly. I think you still want to build him up slowly and eventually get him to contender status. The fight that I picked for him next was against Chico Camus, who's coming off a win over Brad Pickett. I think it'd be a very good test for Borg, and again, Camus has been around the block. He's a very tough guy. Like we said, he just beat Brad Pickett. So I think that'd be a very good matchup, and then if he wins that, then give him a top 10 guy. Again, you don't want to push him too fast, especially considering he's only, I believe, 21 years old. So you don't really have to rush him into these situations.
No.
So that was the main card. Quiggins, we're each going to pick a preliminary card about to talk about. So which one did you find interesting?
I mean, the Elliot Makovsky fight, obviously, we talked about this last week, and we both felt that Makovsky would just be too much. I mean, it was a lot of his wrestling to really, he was stifling just everything that Elliot could do, and then you had those slams that I'm sure for, the wrestling fan in you was appreciative of, especially that second one, because I think had he hit it harder and been able to work that position, he would have ended up in a much more advantageous position, because it definitely stunned Makovsky. That being said, now Elliott's running on an 0-3, not a good skid, but being that the flyweight division is as thin as it is, maybe he sticks around for one more fight.
Yeah, I think just based off his performance and how exciting he was and how resistant he was to losing and how close he was to getting it at the end, I think they'll give him one more fight, and I think they should, because really every one of his losses other than the Makovsky fight has been to ex-title challengers or guys that are in the picture. So I think that they would. I would give him one more chance. But yeah, you're right. Good overall effort from Makovsky, and even in a losing effort, Elliott looked very, very strong. He's a guy that if you give him a fight to rebound on, I'm sure he can make a little bit of a run. Yeah, but the fight I wanted to talk about kind of ended in a little bit of controversy, but I don't think anything's going to come of it, is the Jim Allers Chas Skelly fight. Was very surprised with Skelly's improvement on the feet, although I was a little bit disappointed in Jim Allers' striking defense. I believe Skelly was really only throwing that overhand right. So once you saw that a few times, you really got to scout that out and trying to find a way to avoid that. And I believe on the ground, Allers actually blew out Skelly's ankle with a straight ankle lock. And Skelly did not tap. He admitted that in the post-fight interview. He said, well, it's already damaged. What am I going to do, tap out? It's not going to get any more damage. So props to Skelly to fighting through that, because he was limping really, really bad after that fight. I'm surprised his cornerman didn't carry him to the back. Just shows how tough he is. But at the end of the fight, he rocked Ehlers a few times, and just as he was going in for the kill shot, threw an illegal knee, and it landed clean on the head, and then the referee came in, but the referee told the commission that he was already on the way in to stop the fight. That's why the illegal knee didn't happen. However, if you do watch the tape, it does look like the referee does not come in until the knee comes.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think the referee may have blown that call, and I think was covering himself for that. I don't think it should have been a disqualification, because I don't think it was intentional. But it probably should be a no contest. But I don't think Jim Allers would argue that he lost that fight, because even if he hadn't thrown that knee, I think the fight would have been over. I think one or two more punches would have been it. So
I think that's the only thing that's keeping him from it, because like you said, I mean, that barrage, he was wobbled. I mean, he was going down one way or another. We've seen fighters come back from worse. That being said, that knee was clean, and that ref did not take a single step until that knee was thrown. If he had been even motioning towards stopping it, that would have been different. But what's done is done. Ehlers will learn from this. And like you said, guy throwing an overhand right over and over and over, you got to, adjust for that.
Yeah, and some of that, again, has to lie on his corner, because you'd figure if they're seeing it in the corner between the first and the second round, you got to be like, listen, he is in love with the overhand right. Stay away from the power hand. Stay away from the overhand, and have your guard up. Because Allers' hands were very low in that fight, and he was just taking them on the chin, and he was doing fine in the beginning. He showed off a very impressive chin, but you can't get your bell rung too many times in a row, or it's going to add up. So I think that was his downfall.
On that same respect, with the Bisping-Henderson fight, his corner was yelling at him the whole time to circle the opposite way. And all he did was, walk right into it. So sometimes it's just...
easier said than done, I guess. Well, that was UFC Fight Night 60. Friday, the night before, we had Bellator 133, right? 133, yeah. That featured a main event between Alexander Shlemenko and Melvin Manhoff. Matt got off to a little bit of a slow start, but things picked up in the second round, and obviously they picked up in a big way for Shlemenko, who scored a picture-perfect, stealing it from Emmanuel Newton almost, spinning back fist knockout right on the jaw of Melvin Manhoff, knocked him clean out. What were your thoughts on the performance, and where does Melvin Manhoff go from here? That was his second knockout, clean knockout in 90 days. Obviously not a very safe thing, so just give me your full breakdown on that.
I mean, for Manhoff, I think some time off is what he needs.
He did get a mandatory 6-month suspension, so he will be off.
So even then, give it a couple more months on top of that. Just because, the Schilling fight, he was winning. There's no doubt about it. Schilling caught him in the second, and then you have the Shlemenko fight, which I still think Emmanuel Newton's spinning back fist was better. I thought Shlemenko's looked a little sloppier.
Yeah.
But it still did the job. So I guess that's all that really matters. Shlemenko really proved that his fight where he lost the title was a fluke, at least in his mind. You've got a guy with almost 60 professional fights. I think he's going to make his comeback and show that his losses to Tito and Halsey was
Brendan Halsey
just the beginning. To make him better.
Yeah, I think Shlemenko, the Halsey fight, I think Halsey's a great fighter. Yeah. Very, very underrated. But I do think Shlemenko just got caught early and just got basically quicksand. Once he got caught, he couldn't get out of it. The spinning back fist, definitely very good. I think at this point, Manhoff's chin is just too withered away to take much more.
Yeah.
Because I honestly, that he landed that spinning back fist, but I don't think that was a knockout blow on a lot of guys.
Mm-mm.
Like you said, I think Emmanuel Newton's land cleaner, and he seemed to have gotten him more with like the wrist part of maybe the forearm more than the fist.
It was like right in between. So
Right,
like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, obviously Manhoff, he's probably made a bunch of money in these last two Bellator fights. You're right. I think he needs to just sit out, chill a little bit, get back to the gym in a few months, take it easy, and if he finds a big money opportunity, take it. But he's old. I believe he's 37 or 38. He's not a rookie anymore. He's been kickboxing and doing MMA for over a decade, probably even longer than that. So I think he's got to take a good long look at his career and really evaluate what's more important, getting a few more bucks or your mental health. So
I mean, I kind of wanted to touch on that really quick because you said the money, because I saw some of the salaries, and I know that Shlemenko, I think they said he walked away with 20,000.
That doesn't sound right, but yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't see the salary, so I couldn't tell you. But I know for a fact that Manhoff's one of their draws, so he probably makes a decent amount of money for Bellator.
Yeah.
Anyways, is there any other fight from the Bellator card you wanted to touch on? I didn't think it was an especially strong showing from the company, but just if you have any other thoughts on it.
Oh, and it was 20,000 for Shlemenko. Yeah, that's kind of sad for a former champion.
Well, he might have lowered off of his contract once he lost the title belt. But
yeah,
anything else you want to mention from that card though?
I mean, Honeycutt, looked amazing yet again. The rising prospect, and I kind of have it booked that if Michael Page is victorious on February 27th, I don't think that would be a bad fight to book. Two rising guys.
Yeah, I know. I like Honeycutt as well. He obviously performed well. I think the guy he faced, he was undefeated, but I think his opponent's record to date was very, very questionable. Explode Fight Series in California is known for having very lopsided fights, and that's what he came out of. So it's not very surprising to me. But the only reason I don't like that Michael Page Honeycutt fight is because I don't want the allure of Michael Page to disappear because he faces a power wrestler like Honeycutt. I don't know if he has the takedown defense to stay away from Honeycutt, who is by far just a strong, strong wrestler. So I don't know if I would make that fight, especially not yet, especially because you have Page and he is a draw, and people are going to pay to see him. So I wouldn't say give him cans, but give him guys that are more advantageous to his styling, which is point fighting, kickboxing, and that's the only reason I'd say no to that fight at this point. But maybe down the line at some point.
We'll see.
But again, the other two main card results, Daniel Weichel wins a split decision over Pat Curran in a very uninspired performance by the former two-time Bellator champion, that's Curran. And then Julia Budd in an absolutely dominating performance over Gabrielle Holloway. Wasn't even close. I believe the scorecards were 30-26, 30-25, and 30-24. I can't even remember the last time I saw a 30-24, but that means that every round was a 10-8 or there was a 10-7 round, which is even rarer. So kind of just a very subpar Bellator card on the weekend. The last event we're going to talk about as a recap, we'll briefly touch on World Series of Fighting 18. The main event, Marlon Moraes taking on Josh Hill, and it was a very close fight actually. In the first round, Josh Hill had Moraes' number, even broke his nose in the first round. He was standing there and banging with him. But eventually, I believe it was a 3-2 win for Moraes. He keeps his belt. He eventually got into a groove and stuffed some takedowns from Hill and got his striking going. What did you think of? Did you catch this fight?
The only thing I caught of this was the post-fight speech that we're talking about now.
Yes, Moraes accidentally dropped an F-bomb on national TV. It happens. But
a very large one.
Yes, he did. It happens. It's happened in the UFC before. But if you didn't catch it, it was a very, very good fight actually. I don't think many people gave Josh Hill a chance. I thought he had a chance. I didn't think he was going to win, but I know Hill and his fighting style and how it would match up with Moraes. I didn't think his striking would be as good as it was. He was actually surprisingly sound on the feet. So that was an exciting one. In the co-main event, Shane Campbell took on Derek Boyle. I don't know if you saw this. It was all over the internet. But basically, Campbell destroyed Boyle for the entire fight. And then in the third round, Boyle was rocked and against the cage. And he did a little Street Fighter, I forgot what it's called, a Harudoken or whatever the hell he did. And then
Well, it depends on who you ask. Some people said it was a Hadouken. Some people said it was a Kamehameha.
whatever it is, I don't know what it is. I didn't watch that stuff as much when I was a kid, but basically he used that while the guy was rocked, and it looked like it did something it didn't, and then he went in and punched him a few more times and finished the fight. That was the highlight of that fight. Shane Campbell is one of the top Canadians outside of the UFC, in my opinion. I think his striking is very good, and he has a very underrated ground game. I believe he has a win over Marcus Edwards, who's I'm very high opinion of him in my book. So that's a big win on his resume as well. So Shane Campbell's definitely a Canadian to watch. The last thing I want to talk about is the Andrew McGinnis-Cody McKenzie fight. And the legend of Cody McKenzie continues to just absolutely run rampant in the MMA community. It was a one-round fight, and with about 3 seconds left in the first round, McKenzie would get disqualified after headbutting McGinnis, which right in the face. In my opinion, I think McGinnis could have kept going. I think he wanted out of the fight, honestly. He was probably winning up until that point, but McKenzie's a tough guy. But if you watch the tape, and I don't know if you saw it, Cody McKenzie was on top of him with like 5 or 6 seconds left and literally launched himself like a torpedo right with the crown of his head right into the face of Andrew McGinnis, which caused a stoppage. And he did that because about 10 seconds previous, McGinnis had a handful of his hair, which is also illegal. But I think the funniest part was when the ref broke it up and he went to go talk to Cody while the McGinnis was recovering. He goes, that was an illegal headbutt. And instead of saying sorry it was an accident or something that would not make it look obvious, McKenzie goes, well, so is pulling my hair, which basically sealed his fate of getting a disqualification because he proved that he did it on purpose. So It was kind of funny in a way. But so McKenzie walks away with another loss, albeit by disqualification. But very, very entertaining one round that it was. I was in tears laughing when the disqualification came through. Because
And it's so sad because he had such promise, and it just feels like complained, didn't get paid enough. Okay, I'm retiring.
But he already has another fight booked. I believe he's fighting next month in Canada as well against, I believe it's Ryan Machine. So his brief retirement didn't last very long. Yeah,
no money.
He's got to get paid. He's a commercial fisherman, and he's also a avid man of the drink, as they say. So that was World Series of Fighting. Going forward, we have another UFC Fight Night, this time on Sunday. Coming live from Brazil, we have UFC Fight Night 61, headlined by Bigfoot Silva and Frank Mir, two men who have not won a fight in combined 7 outings. So what should we expect out of this, Quiggins, and what's going to happen to the loser?
Well, I mean, for me, this is going to be a tough fight for Mir. Like you said, he hasn't had a victory since, UFC 140, where he had that horrific, albeit beautiful, Kimura on Big Dog, which I can't watch without cringing to this day.
I love it.
I'll watch it 100 times, but I'll, every time. He's had some tough decision losses to, Overeem and Cormier, and his TKO losses to, Josh Barnett and Junior Dos Santos, when Overeem, pulled out of that fight. It's really a do or die, back to the wall, whatever you want to call it. For Mir, he needs, if he's going to get the win, I think he needs to hang up the gloves. I hate to see it. Frank Mir being probably one of my favorite fighters, when I was getting into the sport. Just the level of competition at heavyweight is nowhere near what it used to be, and he's just getting overworked. I'd love to see him try to recreate what he did with Czech Congo and use his striking to, parlay that into his jiu-jitsu and get the win.
Yeah, I'm a huge Frank Mir fan. I love a good striker, but his submission game is something that it just needs to be studied and watched, because a lot of submission guys are very technical, but they're not as savage with their submissions. Mir is a technical savage. He can be technical when he wants to be. He's very tricky on the ground, but he doesn't just go to finish fights. He goes to maim. He will take your arm with you. He will take your leg with you. If you give him his neck, he's going to try and pop your head off your shoulders. And that's why he's become a fan favorite in the heavyweight division for as long as he's been. But you know what? He's slowed down in his career. I don't think his chin is what it used to be. Although that being said, I don't think Antonio Silva, since he got off TRT, looks the same either. That Andrei Arlovsky fight, he looked atrocious. So it's really a
Or
throw up of
Arlovsky
who.
just looked that good.
Yeah, well, that too, but I mean, I think it's really just a throw up of who can last longer at this point. I don't think that either one of these guys is going to be a contender anytime soon, and I don't know. This is going to be a very interesting fight. If Mir gets it to the ground, I think Mir can win.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'll be able to take down Bigfoot. What is your prediction for the fight, though?
Am I going hard or brain on this one?
You tell me.
I'd love to see Mir take this. I think it's a fight that he can win if he's smart about it. Like I said, when he fought Czech Congo, that big overhand, Czech had the reach on him, and Bigfoot's definitely going to have some reach on him, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That being said, if he can get under those massive things that Silva calls fists, because Silva doesn't have to do much other than touch him, and like you said, his chin is not what it used to be.
Right.
I think he can probably sneak a trip in, get it to the ground. I'm going to be curious to see if he can hold Bigfoot down.
Oh, I think he can. He's a big, strong guy. A lot stronger than we give him credit for. He's a little flabby around the midsection, but he's always been he's pretty strong actually. He's got kind of a good grip strength and all that stuff. I'm gonna go with though I do think Silva's gonna win. I'm gonna go with Frank Mir. And the reason is even when he's when Frank Mir is rocked, he can be dangerous, and we saw that in the Nogueira fight. So even if Silva rocks him and falls him to the ground, dangerous, because Mir was basically unconscious almost, and he secured a Kimura on a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and a guy who's considered one of the greatest submission artists of all time, especially in the heavyweight division.
And then rolled him twice.
Right, exactly. So he had the whereabout with it all to actually do that. Like I said, I do actually think Bigfoot's going to win, but for the record, I'm going to go with my heart, and I'm going to say Frank Mir is going to salvage career with this. And even if he wins, he might still retire. I think he has a future in commentating. I always thought that Mir was a strong color commentator, and he's got personality, so that's the thing they have to look into if when his career is actually, in fact, over.
He's got personality, and he's got the knowledge. If only he would call a guillotine or a guillotine a guillotine, I'd be happier.
He's not the only one that does that, but yes, I agree. I'm a huge Frank Mir fan, and I believe that color commentary should be in his future. I think he should actually take Kenny Florian's place, and Florian should stay on UFC tonight. I think they can spread the wealth a little bit there. Yeah. Moving on to the co-main event, we have a lightweight bout between a returning Michael Johnson taking on Edson Barboza, both men training, I believe, in Florida. I believe Barboza's there now. But they'll be fighting in Brazil. So what is your take on this fight?
So, I mean, Barboza looked really good in his last outing against Green, and even better when he fought Evan Dunham. Evan Dunham's not what he used to be, but he's always a tough fight, a tough guy. And you have Johnson, who hasn't fought in almost a year, when he picked up a win over Melvin Gillard, and that's due to his legal issues that he's having, an arrest for a domestic dispute, I believe it was. So I don't know, the ever eluding ring rust will be a factor. But if Johnson isn't ready mentally, then Barboza's going to take this fight, wherever he wants it, and continue that on a 3-fight streak there.
Yeah, I compare this fight a little bit to the Edson Barboza Danny Castillo fight. The only difference is that Michael Johnson is more athletic and probably a better striker. So I think the wrestling is going to be a difference maker. I think Barboza's got good takedown defense, but Johnson, his combination of striking and athleticism, I think can really set up takedowns well. So I went with Michael Johnson in this fight, but I think it'll be very entertaining, and it will probably be in contention for fight of the night.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on to the next bout, we have hold on for a second, I got to get my notes in front of me here, a middleweight bout between Ultimate Fighter Brazil 1 winner, Cesar Mutante Ferreira, and Sam Alvey, a Bellator veteran and a veteran of the Ultimate Fighter 16, which we just spoke about. So, Quiggin, is Ferreira the real deal, or is he just another Brazilian pretender?
I wouldn't say he's a pretender, but I mean, Alvey's return to the UFC didn't exactly go the way he wanted it to, but he made that, a pretty big statement in November when he knocked out Dylan Andrews. So I think Ferreira's just a wannabe, or, like you said, I think he has potential, but I think this is Alvey's fight to win. I just think Alvey's got more of a skill set to take the victory on this one. And I know that's probably crazy, but I'm going with Sam Alvey. Smiley.
We have our first dissension here. I'm going to go with Fajeda. The reason being, Alvey, I thought, was losing the fight to Dylan Andrews, and the knockout came as a result. Andrews, I believe, tried to suplex him, and Alvey landed on top of him on his head. So I think that that's a little bit of an asterisk win for him. But I think Fajeda's striking is better than Alvey's, and I think he's got the takedown defense to stay away. And I think he's physically stronger. So I think Fajeda's going to win this. I don't exactly see this being a barn burner, as they call it, but it will be another notch on the belt for Fajeda, who should be on to bigger and better things at some point, hopefully in the near future.
That's our second dissension, because you went with Johnson over Barboza.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I did forget you said that. Moving on, because there's not much to discuss with that fight. We have a lightweight bout, which I'm very much looking forward to, between Rustam Khabilov and Adriano Martins. Very interesting fight. Martins is really, really underrated at lightweight. I am a big fan of Martins. He's a good ground fighter, has some striking, but he's taking on really a guy who is on his way. Another guy that lost to Benson Henderson as a prospect, but gave him all he could handle. And I really think that Khabilov, again, just another one of these guys from the Russian Caucasus who is very, very well-rounded and is a future contender. In Martins, you have a guy, Khabilov has seen guys like Martins before, so this isn't going to be anything out of the ordinary. I think Khabilov will get the finish here, probably by TKO, because Martins is very strong on the ground with his submission defense. What do you have in this fight?
I have Khabilov too. I mean, he hasn't fought since, like you said, his fight to Benson Henderson.
That was in June, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's quite a long time. I think he's gonna go out there and he's gonna try and do, he's gonna use those suplexes to his advantage. And like you said, Martins might be good on the ground, but it's just gonna depend on if Khabilov's, wrestling is too much. And I predicted a TKO as well for Khabilov and, get him back in the win column because, like you said, just the Russian prospect, these guys, they're so talented and they've got a lot to show, and they're not done yet, so it should be a good fight.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one as well. Moving forward, we have then a bantamweight bout, kind of a mismatch in my opinion. You have Yuri Alcantara, who is top 10 in my opinion, taking on Frankie Saenz, who is 1-0 in the UFC, but it was against a guy who's now at flyweight, but wasn't even in the top 40 of the bantamweight division. So in examining this fight, I think Saenz is a decent fighter, but I think Alcantara is seasoned enough and has seen guys like him before that this is going to be nothing new for him as well. I think Alcantara is other than wrestling, I think technically superior everywhere else. So I think he's going to keep this on the feet. He's going to hurt Saenz, and he might finish him midway through the fight or late in the fight. What do you take on that?
Yeah, and I mean I was kind of thinking the same thing as far as the mismatch because like you said, Saenz fighting a guy who fights at flyweight now, and Alcantara, his fight against Faber was really good.
Yes.
I mean, he had Faber hurt. Almost took him out in that first round, so it was pretty exciting. And I mean, he's been on I hate saying he's been on a tear, but he's been on a pretty good, streak. Some decisions, a knockout, but I just think, like you said, he's going to be way too much for Saenz. No way.
Yeah, so we will both take Alcantara on that fight. The final main card bout will be in the welterweight division. Sean Strickland drops from middleweight, where he might have been a tad undersized, to take on Santiago Ponzinibbio of Argentina, a Ultimate Fighter Brazil veteran in his own right. What do we see going on with this fight, Quiggins?
That's a good question because I totally missed that one.
Oh, all right. Well, then I will give you an insight. Sean Strickland for a long time was one of my top middleweight prospects outside the UFC. And since coming here, he choked out Bubba McDaniel, which, maybe not the biggest accomplishment, but it was good for a short notice, debut. And then he won a very controversial decision in Germany against Luke Barnett. Whether or not you agree with that decision, it is what it is. So he's 2-0 in the UFC. In this fight, I see Strickland just being the guy that achieves the takedown and just does ground and pound and submission attempts from the top. Ponzinibbio is a very good striker, and he's very powerful. We saw that in his knockout of Wendell Oliveira in his last fight. So I think that if Ponzinibbio doesn't get an early knockout, it's going to be a long night for him because Strickland will get in on takedowns and will hold him there and beat him up on the ground. So I'm going to take Sean Strickland for this fight, probably by decision. Do you have a?
I'll agree with that.
You'll take Strickland just based on my assessment. All right. Is there any one prelim fight you want to talk about quickly?
None that I can see that really like stand out. I mean, obviously Jessica Andrade and Marion Renault, however you want to say it. To be honest, for me, any women's fights anymore have just been, something to watch. Very rarely will you see one that doesn't catch your interest in some way, shape, or form. Especially with the strawweights and this being the bantamweights. I feel like they haven't gotten as much of the spotlight lately. So this should be an interesting fight, just to get you right into that main card.
Yeah, that's the one I would have picked as well, but since you took that, I'm just going to quickly mention on the Fight Pass prelims, Douglas Silva is taking on a man by the name of Cody Gibson, the man famous for a Google me bitch. So I want to see if Gibson can back up the Googling in this fight against a guy from Brazil who made his name on cans and came to the UFC and faltered in his first fight. So I would really, really like to see Cody Gibson. I actually liked Cody Gibson before he came on to the UFC. So I'm obviously busting his balls a little bit, but he's a good prospect at bantamweight. Now I'd want to see if he can follow through with his potential.
Yeah.
So then we're just going to briefly talk about the KSW card, which is on Saturday for us, late morning, early afternoon. It is headlined by a title bout. It's actually two title fights, one in the welterweight division between Boris Mankowski and Mikhail Sarev. If you don't know, Sarev is a Bellator veteran, but one of the top fighters in Russia, currently not in the UFC at welterweight. Very good card. Do you know anything about either one of these guys, Quiggins?
I haven't even been able to find the card.
Oh, really? Try Tapology. They have a lot of good stuff on Tapology. But Mankowski was one of the guys who made my 5 prospects the UFC should sign in the welterweight division series. I told you about that series earlier this year. He was one of the guys I had on there. Very, very talented guy. Just one of the many Polish fighters, making a name for themselves right now and really showing that country has a lot of talent. But he's taken on an experienced guy, but he's got at least 30 fights pro in Mikhail Sarev, who's a very, very good submission artist. So it's a very nice matchup to top the card off. Not exactly KSW's most attractive card on paper, but there's a lot of really good fights. And then, you talk about the women, you have the co-main event. Karolina Kowalkiewicz is taking on, I believe, Kalindra Faria. Both of them, in my opinion, top 15 women in the strawweight division. If Kowalkiewicz can get a win, I don't see why she shouldn't be in the UFC, especially coming off of a win over Mizuki Inoue, who is really a prodigy in the strawweight division. Just further down that card, you got another guy who was in my top 5 prospects the UFC should sign series, Matush Gamrot, taking on another Bellator veteran in Rodrigo Cavallero. A couple other names on there. Aslanbek Saidov will take on Rafal Mox. And Michael Wolodarek will take on Simon Bajor. So a lot of good talent, European talent, especially Polish talent on the card. Obviously, it's a Polish promotion, the home of Mamad Khalidov and Mariusz Pudzianowski and all those guys. So if they do have some way to broadcast that and you can check it out, please do. KSW is an awesome MMA promotion, one of my favorite in Europe.
Well, then you have Kalindra, who fought Jessica Aguilar back in November for World Series Fighting, and that was a good fight.
Yes, that's the one who's fighting Karolina. And like I said, I think Faria is a top 15 talent. She fights out of Brazil. She had a huge winning streak coming into that Aguilar fight, and like you said, she gave her all Aguilar could handle. Obviously, Aguilar walked away with the decision, but Kalindra Faria is no joke. If you've never seen her fight, she's got an abundance of fights on YouTube. Very, very well-rounded and very tough. She is tough as nails too. And she's mean and she's violent. So Kalindra Faria on YouTube, check that out. Anything else you want to talk about with that KSW card?
No, not on that one.
Okay. Any breaking news or news pieces you want to touch on before we get to the wrestling minute?
Nothing that's not going to be a broken record. So I'm kind of excited for the Miocic Mark Hunt fight that got announced for the Australia card. Miocic still got all the props from me from that fight with JDS, going the full 5 rounds.
Yep.
I feel like that was one of those fights where his stock, definitely rose even in a loss. And to fight a let's call him a legend in Mark Hunt. That's going to be a tough fight, but I think it's a fight that he could win.
Yeah, and Combat Press did break the news of that Mark Hunt-Stipe Miocic fight, so I'm actually glad that you did bring that up. Shout out to Neil Rook, who's doing big work down there right now. With the Australia card, so we had the main event announced, but then they announced, I believe, 7 other fights that are on that card currently. I feel like Joe Silva hacked my computer because I am a amateur matchmaker, and after every fight I switch up the matches and who's going to fight who next. So after every event it's a little bit different, but I have all the names of who's fighting who next on my computer, and I believe 4 matchups from that card he took straight from my computer. The first being Hunt versus Miocic. I also had down Brad Tavares, Robert Whitaker. That's one that he made in the middleweight. That's actually the co-main event. Anthony Perosh, Sean O'Connell I had written down. Dylan Andrews, Brad Scott I had written down. And then Beck Rawlings versus Sohi Ham. I had that. So actually I had 5 fights for that Australia card written down, and they ended up actually being on the card. So I have to give myself a little bit of a pat on the back for that. But if Joe Silva has some sort of spyware on my computer, I really don't mind because I like all those fights. I think that's actually a very underrated card, and I believe it airs the night before the UFC Philippines card, which actually we could mention.
Yeah,
we didn't mention it last week. Uriah Faber taking on Frankie Edgar in the main event. What do you think of that fight?
I think it's interesting. You hear all this talk that both of those guys were offered, T.J. Dillashaw, which obviously Faber's not going to fight him, and I don't think it's going to take. They keep saying there's a number. I really don't think there is. That being said, I'm excited for that fight, and it's just convenient that a few months ago somebody had a picture of them, squaring off, and now it's a reality. Faber hasn't lost a non-title fight ever.
That's right.
It's one of the weirdest streaks I think that there is. That being said, it's going to be a tough fight. Edgar's really adjusting to 145, and I think Faber's kind of gotten used to 135. So, going back up, I'm excited for it either way it turns out. It's a good fight for Frankie, and it's a really good fight for Uriah. So.
Yeah, I think stylistically it's an interesting matchup. I do think it favors Edgar's style more. But, Faber, not cutting that extra 10 pounds could be, revitalized. And, you may see him jump back up to 45, especially at this point in his career. Especially with Dillashaw running the 135-pound division. So I'm a big fan of the fight. It's a nice first main event for the Philippines. The rest of the fights they announce are lesser-known fighters. Philippe Nogueira is getting his return to the UFC. If you didn't see that news.
Yeah, I did.
Listen, it's not a good matchup for him. I think Yui Chul Nam is a very, very strong, underrated fighter. So he's not getting a welcome mat here. He's going to get a guy that's going to, he's going to fight him for 3 rounds. So. But yeah, I think both of those cards on that weekend are strong, and I will definitely try and keep an eye on both of those events in the Australia and the Philippines. So a big night for the South Pacific, that is.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to quickly do a wrestling minute here for you. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, and then we will sign off. I just wanted to talk about the build-up to Fastlane, which will be on Sunday on pay-per-view or on the WWE Network. If you sign up now for 7 days, you get the month of February free, which includes the pay-per-view. It's $9.99 a month, not to do any advertising for them because they do it enough on their own. Yeah, they do it enough on their own on the damn show. So, but the main event is Roman Reigns versus Daniel Bryan. And I think they did a very, very good job of selling pay-per-views on Monday Night Raw. The last-minute seller. They had the main event, which was, very dragging and awful. Between Daniel Bryan and the Big Show. At this point, Big Show is not going to be putting in 5-star matches anytime soon. But, obviously it was a storyline match. It wasn't, supposed to be a catch-as-catch-can wrestling type of, atmosphere. It was building up the animosity between Reigns and Bryan going into their main event fight at Fastlane. And after the match, it ended in a disqualification because Roman Reigns interfered. And then it turned into a wild, all-out brawl around the arena. And it was exciting. It was very exciting. And, in the middle of it, they shook hands. The referees broke them apart. They shook hands. They walked away and then immediately went back at each other and went 1,000 times crazier than they were going before. And basically what ended up happening was they were behind the announce desk and a bunch of the agents from the back and more referees came out and they broke it up. Got to see an appearance by Robbie Brookside, one of the new trainers down at NXT, as well as one of my personal favorites, Bill DeMott, A lot of people don't know Bill DeMott, but I was always a fan of Bill DeMott's work. He is the head trainer at NXT, I believe. Came out and made appearances to break up the fight. I believe you also saw most of the referees. I thought I saw William Regal. I'm not sure, but that's beside the point. The brawl.
God.
The brawl at the end of the show really was done well. It got people choosing sides, and that's what you need when you have a supposed baby face versus a baby face matchup. I think that it's going to be a really, really great match. It's a good thing they're closing because I don't think they'll have Daniel Bryan win, and you don't want the fans turning on the entire show. And I think at this point the fans kind of expect that he's not going to win. He'll probably get screwed over somehow. But the way they sold the pay-per-view at the end of Raw was great. I thought in general, I think Raw was done very well after 2 or 3 weeks of it just being eh. But I mean,
the time management didn't work very well because if my recollection, it went until about 11:20, 11:25 with that brawl at the end. So I did watch it. So
okay. Yeah, okay. So you did see that. I thought they did a very good job. You're right. They did go over time, but it was worth it because in the end it did a lot to advance that storyline and get interest into it because before it wasn't. It was like, oh, okay, these two babyfaces are going to briefly, feud before Brock Lesnar comes into the fold, whatever. But I thought they did a nice job, and I forgot to talk about this last week. I don't know if did I talk about the NXT show last week?
Mm-mm.
Oh my God! If you did not see the NXT Rival show, because it was on, I think it was on Thursday, so we hadn't had a show since then. The NXT show, and people who like pure wrestling and not sports entertainment bullshit, watch NXT. It is a million times better. And I know you're from Florida, and that's where they tape it at Full Sail University.
Mm-hmm.
Just they did like it's kind of like it's like their equivalent of a pay-per-view, but it's called it's a live show because usually they're taped and they have like major matches, and the entire show from top to bottom was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. The match of the night was easily Adrian Neville versus Finn Balor, the former Pac versus Prince Devitt. Was amazing. Just probably the best match of the year so far, in my opinion, anywhere. And then the main event was awesome. It was a close second. You had Kevin Owens, the former Kevin Steen, taking on Sami Zayn, the former El Generico. They have a lot of history. They put on a great match, but that match was more about storytelling than anything, and they did an amazing job with that. So, again, if you don't watch NXT, watch it because that NXT TakeOver special on Thursday was off the charts. Anything else you want to mention in general, whether it be wrestling or MMA?
No, that was the biggest one. Like I said, I caught the end of Raw last night, and it was, they, like you said, they did a really good job of building that up. Obviously, anybody watching it knows the referees break them up, they shook hands, and as soon as they turned around, it was right back at it.
Yep.
And you knew it was coming, and you didn't care. You still wanted to see what was coming on next. So I agree, they did a really good job, and, I've got my wrestling roots, so I'm not completely pushed aside. I don't agree that CM Punk said that MMA is pro wrestling, but
yeah, I don't agree with that either. But
I'm still curious to see what who he gets matched up with. But we'll talk about that in a year and a half when it happens.
Yeah, I think it'll be at the end of the year, the last couple of months of 2015. But
they'll put it on an end of the year card. Something to.
I have a theory it'll be on the December pay-per-view. The end of the year pay-per-view. That's always a big card. It was a big card this year when we had Hendricks and Lawler. It'll be, I believe it had Pettis and whoever he fought. So
Melendez.
What's that?
Melendez.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was.
Well, then you had the year before that, and the years before that, the Dos Santos Velasquez, the Silva Weidman. I mean.
Right. Well, they said it's going to be a co-main event, so obviously it's going to be on a big card because CM Punk, whether you like him or not, whether you think he's going to be competitive or not, is a pay-per-view draw, and people will buy the pay-per-view just based on him to see how he does. It's like the James Toney effect, even though I think that was to a lesser effect.
Here's the other question, though. So, with Lesnar's contract, supposedly expiring in March or April?
Right.
Does the UFC push to get him back if he wants it?
Yes, I think they absolutely have to. They're in need of box office draws right now, and you cannot even have an argument. Lesnar is a box office draw. You can look at WWE numbers. You can look at the UFC numbers when he was around. People know who Brock Lesnar is. He's one of the most famous athletes, and they are going to buy pay-per-views to watch him fight and compete. And
so do you put Lesnar and CM Punk on the same card?
I would think that's a great idea. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I think that'd be awesome if they were able to do that. I think that you have Punk fight whoever he's going to fight, and then you have Lesnar fight either you give him Frank Mir #3 the rubber match, or you give him Josh Barnett. I think Josh Barnett would be a good.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Well. So.
Yeah, I was right on board with that rubber match. Just find out. Obviously the second one didn't go Mir's way, but that rubber match has been one in the making for so many years. It's not as relevant as it would have been.
No, but that doesn't really matter because it'll sell just based on the fact that Brock Lesnar's fighting. So,
yeah.
And then you have a little bit of animosity. They still don't like each other. So I think it would be the fight to make.
So I don't think that would be a bad idea if they can get Lesnar back in, get him back in 6 months. Give him the time to prepare and everything else.
Right.
I don't think it's a far-fetched idea. I'm all about the business of exciting fights and fights that make sense. But like you said, this is a business, and that's going to make an extremely large amount of money if they can pull it off.
Yes, and that's a great way to end the show because pro wrestling connecting to MMA, we tied it all together at the end there, Mr. Quiggins, and I thank you for your bridge work. Anyways, so just some more plugs before we go here. Again, go to combatpress.com for all of your MMA needs, interviews, breaking news, which we've been doing a lot of lately, opinions, etc., etc. Okay, check that out. Also, follow them on Twitter at Combat Press. Follow myself on Twitter. Once I get to 1 million, I will be doing a big prize giveaway. We're not even close yet, though, so you people need to stop slacking. That is at Big Riles MMA. I will flash the screen to my compadre over here, his Twitter handle, at Quiggins MMA. Follow him as well for a random insight on MMA and some random thoughts as well. Also, one more shameless plug for myself. Follow my BleacherReport.com work. And that's pretty much it. So for all of us at Combat Press, including myself, Riley Contek, and Matt Quiggins, have a great night watching the fights this weekend, and we will see you back here Tuesday, 9:30.
And I still need a sponsor.